Welcome to Longevity Industries' presentation of the Destiny of Manufacturing podcast. I am your host, Dean Phillips, and I have with me today Matt Garbarino from Cincinnati Incorporated, CI, and he is the Director of Marketing Communications. Are you there, Matt?
Hey, how's it going, Dean? Thanks for having me on.
Great to have you here. Thank you for taking time to be here. So right off the bat, what is your key takeaway for the Destiny of Manufacturing? So 5 years into your crystal ball, what do you see changing?
I would say the biggest thing is an on-demand environment. That basically the culture, and this is the way it's trending, is people want to have access to what they want now, and they want it on their timeline, whether it be parts, service, training, support. It has to be around their schedule, not the other way around.
Right. And I see those trends too. It is definitely becoming more of an on-demand culture, and it can be a little scary too for a lot of people that have to think in those terms.
It is, and it sounds outside of a company like ours, a manufacturing company that makes machinery. We see more of it on a consumer basis and how people consume information, and we have such a generation of people out there that consume information differently and what their expectations are. But for us as a manufacturing company that makes machine tools, there's a lot that goes into trying to do that, to be proactive, to be able to communicate to a user what's happening with their product, with their machine, before they know what's happening with it, like if it's a maintenance interval, whether it's going to be something that is going to have to be addressed before it actually goes down. So there's a lot of development. There's a lot of planning that goes into kind of building an infrastructure so that on-demand response can be created for that. So it's a work in progress for sure that takes time. And I think that not only our type of company, but industry in general is kind of migrating towards that methodology.
Sure. Now, so tell us a little bit about your background with Cincinnati Incorporated and about the company itself.
Yeah, so my background, I guess I've been called a retread, which means I've come back to work twice. So I had started as a young engineer, actually, my degree was in engineering, but as a sales engineer in the early 90s. And back in those days, you'd go through an extensive training course to learn all about the machinery. And I was put in a sales capacity and lived throughout the Southeast doing that, selling press brakes, lasers, and shears. I did that for about 6 years, and then ended up leaving Cincinnati for personal reasons to kind of move to another part of the country where family was, and did kind of a multitude of different things with software companies and owning my own business. But ultimately came back in 2010. The company was under new management and really wanted to create a marketing effort. The company, really a 120-year-old company, privately held. You would think that there was a lot of marketing behind that, but the company was always an engineering-driven company. Never was heavily invested into marketing, but really that time is changed. I mean, you have to have some marketing for any company to get to the next level. So I was brought on to really kind of develop and grow the marketing for Cincinnati Incorporated in 2010, and here we are 9 years later, and there's been a lot of initiatives to do that.
That's great. So when you got involved in the area of manufacturing, obviously it's evolved quite a bit. What do you see as some of the big changes coming for manufacturers that they're going to have to deal with?
Well, I said there's two things. There's, I was talking about on demand. I mean, that's there's a lot to what that means. Where people want to have access to service and support and training parts, at their fingertips, in an easy way. So I call that kind of an on-demand environment. There's a lot to that. But, kind of what complements that is automation too, because there's a trend in automation for a lot of reasons. I mean, one is the labor force. It's a growing issue, at least in this country, is finding a skilled labor force that works in manufacturing operations. So it's really put the emphasis for companies like ourselves to develop automation, so that our machines can run unattended or partially unattended, and especially doing more, basic type tasks, loading material or feeding material into a machine, that type of thing. So there's a huge focus on automation. That isn't going away. And, you talk about that crystal ball in 5 years. That's going to be the other thing that any company in our world is going to be putting a lot of time into that. I think it's going to be interesting to see in 5 years what that looks like. But automation will be a big part of any machine tool by that time.
Yeah. When you got involved in manufacturing, what made you get involved in it? Was it something that drove you, a family history, or just interesting to see how things worked?
I think it was the ability to create something or see how something is created. I mean, my background's in engineering, and I think most people that get into that field have an interest in creating something or solving problems. Mm-hmm. And what's interesting to that is when I came to work at Cincinnati as a sales engineering role, you really are still in that capacity, even though you're not maybe a quote unquote engineer designing something. You're solving other people's problems or helping them solve their problems. You're going into in this case, a metal fabrication company, and they have challenges that they're trying to address. It could be replacing a machine. It could be adding capacity. It might be consolidation. It might be trying to develop a new part. So it's more than just showing them a machine and here's how it works. It's like, what's the best way to tackle their problem? So you really take some ownership into what their problems are. You have to really understand it and then walk through that solution, because you, as the quote unquote consultant or sales engineer, don't always know what that solution is until you kind of walk that path with them. So, myself personally, I take great pride in, helping to solve those problems. And it's pretty satisfying when you finally do. I mean, ultimately, it leads to a new machine sale, which is satisfying, but even bigger than that is, you help somebody with a problem and they're being productive as a result of that solution.
What are some of the industry challenges you see occurring over the next 5 years? Is there certain areas that you see becoming more problematic, more so on like the workforce side, or do you see it more being on materials?
Yeah, I mean, I certainly on the workforce side, if anything has been echoed over and over, it's from companies that we sell to, from the owners, from the managers. It's trying to find people that have the skills they need to operate or manage their departments with their machines. So that kind of goes into training. People just, the workforce today doesn't have the training in the type of skills like sheet metal fundamentals or sometimes even basic math skills to do the things that you would need to working in a manufacturing shop for. So we hear complaints all the time that number one, the workforce, there's just a shortage of that kind of skilled labor to do those things. And number two, there's a lack of training resources for that labor. And at least it's easy to access. So at CI, those are things that we're very well aware of. And, part of us being successful in business is to be able to address that too. So in fact, I'm working on with a team right now. We're spearheading efforts to build online training courses. We are fortunate that we have a lot of subject matter experts here. And now it's just trying to take that information and put it in a format that, our customers, regardless of their age, regardless of the demographics, can access and help them with that training issue.
Right. And that's it, and that goes back to that on-demand desire that people want to have, especially younger generation certainly wants to have it when they want it, kind of thing.
It really is. On the area of training, it's interesting. I think in our business, the traditional training is, you sell someone a machine and they come to you. They send a company will send an operator or a supervisor or an engineer to you for 2, 3, 4 days to learn, about the machine, how to program it, how to operate it. But in today's environment, it's really challenging to get a company to want to release somebody for that long. I mean, time is of the essence. I mean, I think it more than ever, everybody's time is precious. And to send somebody away for that type of a time, even though it's time well spent, it's challenging. So going back to the on-demand thing, how can we as a company selling high-tech machinery offer other avenues for somebody to learn about our equipment, understand it, and still be successful with it, where not all that time is spent at our facility in Cincinnati. So that's why we're kind of looking at a hybrid approach. How much of this training could we do online, where it doesn't matter that you're physically at our facility? And maybe we could supplement where we say, okay, maybe what used to be a 4-day training class at Cincinnati is a 1-day class, because the other part we'll do online. And then the 1 day that you're here will be extremely productive because it's all hands-on, on the machine with an instructor, making parts. And so I think we're trying to evolve how we do it. And then you do have the on-demand part with the front end of that, but then there is a portion of it that you can't substitute for hands-on training too.
Right. Especially in the fabrication environment, there's always a challenge there of, and I have often gotten into these discussions with people at different universities who say, when you say, we need to have somebody who understands tool and die and machine tools, and their response is, well, we have a machining program. One doesn't necessarily automatically mean the other, because when you're trying to solve a problem, I've got to make a quality part, and here's what it needs to be. The tool is only one part of that environment. You have material, you have the machine. All of these things are part of that. And I think having more of a holistic approach is something we are often looking for, but we don't provide the training for. Is that something that you guys kind of get into as more of a bigger picture approach?
Most definitely. And I that's one of the challenges with our sales teams is they are being asked to essentially be a consultant to address what you're talking about. So somebody, for example, may be looking to purchase a press brake as an example. And the person we're dealing with, say, here's the part that I need to make. It's made out of this material. I have no idea what tooling I need. I have no idea the bend sequence, how to form it. I don't know what the material properties do with respect to how it's bent. Cincinnati, help me out. Well, okay, there's a lot there, right? There's a lot to take in. So we have to, when we look at, at the end of the day, we're trying to sell machinery, but we have to help somebody walk through that process. And so that means our sales team has to really be good at not only listening to what the issues are, but consulting back with it, and not always by themselves. I mean, they will work with a team back at our plant, with some tech support where they can do that. So they can say, okay, these are the kind of materials are being used. They have these characteristics. They don't want the parts to be marked, so we have to address it with this kind of die. This is the kind of die that they're going to need to do this kind of bend sequence with the type of machine. Here's the size machine they're going to need based on how they're bending it. There's just a lot of things there. And so the customer just wants an answer. They want to know, what's the solution and how much is it going to cost me?
Right.
Well, that sounds simple, but there's sometimes a lot that takes to get that, information back to them.
Oh yeah. Yeah. And that's, I think one of the things that sometimes people overlook is that when it comes to manufacturing, they're looking for a solution. They're not looking for a piece of equipment. They're looking for a solution. And
no question about it.
And that's a challenge to just say, make me a solution. And because even if you could come up with a solution, that's only for that given day with that given material. And you have to be able to show them. It's very much a teach a man to fish philosophy.
It is. And what's been an interesting trend that we've noticed recently is, we talk about this on-demand world that is continually to trend where people want access to everything when they want it. But we're also seeing, I'll call it kind of the do-it-yourselfers mentality, which is kind of neat because we are seeing that, a lot of the customers dealing with do want to solve these things themselves. They don't always know how to do it. So a good example of what's been a neat success story in that is we've recently in the last 5-6 years have gotten into the additive manufacturing arena, 3D printing, right? And when you look at 3D printing and metal fabrication, you say, what on earth is the synergy between those two? I mean, sure, a 3D printer can print all kinds of gadgets and stuff like that, but really, what would a metal fabricator do? Well, one neat thing we found with it is the ability for a fabricator to print their own press brake tooling, believe it or not, out of plastic. Seems hard to believe, right? Well, what happens is by giving someone the ability that they can buy this printer and they have the ability to print their own die for their press brake. Now, there's limits to that, right? It's not going to be something like that's going to last for years. These dies typically can have up to 1,000 hits. They're typically used for air bending. But by giving them that tool, and once they learn that tool, you kind of empowered them to solve some of their own problems because now they have a tool that they can play around with and they can say, you know what, I've got this part I got to make. Now, historically, I had to give these drawings to Cincinnati or to a tooling company. You know what, I've got this machine here. I can kind of learn how to do this myself. So we're starting to empower them with this and introduce this technology. And what we're seeing is kind of that a little bit of a paradigm shift where some of these companies are saying, hey, I want to be able to do this myself. I don't have to rely on someone else to do it. And by the way, it opens up all kinds of other doors I didn't even know I had to do things proactively, reaching out for new business because I can design my own tool. I can make these parts the way I want. So this is a recent trend, right? And it's something that we're kind of on the leading edge of doing this, at least in our industry. And so I'm starting to see more of that, where these companies are able to do that. So wouldn't that be a great world where you're giving your customers the tools to solve their own problems, essentially?
Right. And it's great to be able to, and I think that's one of the big advantages of additive and 3D printing is that you can show somebody a tangible result. I can run a die that is fairly limited, but I can get the message across. Here's the part. Here's what it'll look like. Then we can go and make a hard tool for it, and it doesn't cost you that high amount of money to buy a special tool or buy something with a particular nose radius or things like that. You can create that yourself, test it, and then show them the results, and then they can say, this is exactly what I need. And then they can look at hard tooling it, doing other things. They can build their own and sit there and become their own R&D shop where they can create parts for their customers. And that's you're absolutely right. I love the word empowerment.
That's what it's doing. And, if you think about it too, it kind of feeds into the whole on-demand thing too, right? Because now they have a tool that, at their discretion, they can do these things when and how they want. And so that again, when I use that word on-demand, it's not necessarily just like on-demand training. It's just kind of a mindset. It's a culture shift to things. And 3D printing is certainly one of that. I mean, you can't get any more on-demand than that. I mean,
right.
You design something, you put it there, I want to see what it is immediately. And you have that ability to see what that looks like and get it, at your fingertips when you want it.
Sure. If you're on right now and we have some younger audience listening, what advice can you offer them, a young engineer, about being prepared for a career in manufacturing and what opportunities are available to them?
Yeah, I think, I think this would apply to anybody, whether it's in manufacturing or not. I think the biggest thing I see for anybody to be successful is being able to step into a situation, and it's okay that you don't know much about it, but being able to take ownership in your role in that situation and the solution. And that's going to mean that you may not know a lot about it. It means that you have to ask a lot of questions. It means you have to take the initiative to research stuff where people aren't necessarily telling you everything you need to know. It requires a lot of initiative. It takes, motivation and perseverance and all those things. And so I don't mean to be generic about it, but I really believe whether you're in manufacturing or not, it's a mindset to be better at that job. And I think that you have to do those things. It's kind of the basic skills to get better at things. I know me personally, I can remember back in the day when I was in sales, Cincinnati had provided awesome training for us in the field. But at the end of the day, where I really learned my most was when I was out in the field. And not because anyone told me, it's because I proactively went out and sought the answers to things. And in this day and age, thankfully, there's so many, places to find things. I mean, you can literally Google something or YouTube something to find, even in metal fabrication, how do I bend this kind of part, or what does this mean when you talk about fiber lasers versus CO2? I mean, you have, granted, the sources of that data, some is better than others. You have to be judicious with, what those quality, and not. But there's a lot out there. But to that point, especially in our industry, I think that the resources are a little bit more limited compared to other industries because just, the nature of what we're doing. But there's associations out there. In our case, there's, FMA, Fabricators Manufacturers Association. There's Society of Manufacturing Engineers. There's a lot of associations out there that you can become members of. They have resources that they provide. They have groups and meetings and seminars, clinics. There's all these things. So you just have to be plugged into those and then pick and choose, what you think, fits well for you. And I think that's above and beyond the whole ownership thing, right? And taking the initiative, to learn about a job, or really to learn all the things you need to better solve problems in a job.
I think that's absolutely true with, especially nowadays. What new technologies do you see shifting across our industry? What improvements do you see on the horizons coming from some of the new technologies?
Well, a big part of any of the machines that we have today is always the focus on the control itself, I would say. So, having touchscreen controls that have graphic interfaces that are hooked up online that can, provide you information and analytics on what's going on. That's a big thing right now, and that's not going away. And then the other thing is the ability to access information about your equipment, whether it's through an app or whether it's through a dashboard. The Internet of Things, or Industry 4.0 is a big trending thing, which essentially what we're talking about is, the ability to analyze what's happening with your equipment, and with that data, how does that help me? Okay, it's great that you can have a dashboard and we provide this, that can tell you information about your machines, how many strokes it's got, how many parts it's made, any fault errors. But then also, what do you do with that information? I mean, it's great to have it. It gives you some insight as to maybe if your machine's down or not. But what does it tell you about utilization? What does it tell you about uptime? What does it tell you about, how many parts you're going to? I mean, that's the interpretation part. And I think that's the next leap that I'm seeing that we're trying to make, and other companies are trying to make, that now that we're starting to provide tools to get this information, we need to help companies provide them with tools so they know what to do with that information, so it actually helps them.
Mm-hmm. Do you see that becoming more of an AI part of the system itself?
I think part of it is. I think that there's definitely, when you collect information, you can monitor trends. There's the ability that, you can proactively predict things that could happen. And so that's part of that. But in addition to that, I think that, when we talk about AI and all that, I mean, it definitely, that is, that's something that's being talked about, not only in the controls, but in, offline. Like, what can we do to be connected to a machine offline at our facility, that there's some intelligence being built about the data that's happening, that we can communicate back so it's not happening locally. So there's a lot, there's a lot of focus on that. There's a lot of ways to go, though, to get there. One of the cool things I've seen, kind of shifting a little bit from your AI question, which is, this term of augmented reality and virtual reality is another, technology that we're seeing. One of the things that we're starting to adopt and use over the last 3 years is something called Help Lightning. It's a tool, basically an augmented reality tool, where if we're trying to help somebody on a machine remotely, which we have to do all the time, traditional ways are through a phone call, or we might be able to do a web meeting with their control, essentially, where you can screen share and access things. Now, the other thing that we're doing is we're actually able to see what they're doing, point to it through technology like augmented reality. So how that looks is, imagine you have an operator on a laser, and he's got some failure that's going on, and he opens up a panel. Well, he can actually take out his smartphone or his tablet, and through the software app that we have, he can actually connect with our tech support and not only show the camera live of what he's seeing, but we can superimpose over his screen a print. It could be our fingers pointing to something. It could be, highlighting or circling something that's right in front of him that he doesn't see. So basically, it's another supplemental way of helping somebody work through a problem. It's kind of like that virtual service person over your shoulder, who's not physically there, but virtually there. And we're seeing more demand in that, as far as people don't know that they want that, but once they see this as a tool that we can help support with, we're seeing some good response to that. And so that's something that we've introduced about 3 years ago, and we're slowly trying to introduce that to the market as another tool to help people out.
Yeah, I think that's really an exciting aspect of a new way to troubleshoot. And now, does that also provide for ability to pull up manuals through it, or is that separate from that?
No, you could definitely do that. I mean, in fact, that's one of the kind of examples that we illustrate when we're doing it. Is it'll show an operator who's got his phone and he's at the machine, and literally while we're looking at whatever the circuit might be, or we're looking at the laser head or something like that, then all of a sudden on their screen a print might appear and something's highlighted on the print, and then they can freeze that screen. Or maybe we just put something else on the screen, whether even if it's not a manual, maybe it's an illustration, or maybe it's a video of something that we want to show them, and then they can play that on their screen. So it's really kind of we're actually able to do that on the fly based on what the circumstances are. And even our own service team uses it. So it's not always the customer. It could be we have a service tech on site, because oftentimes our own service people, they have to, reach back to our engineering staff or someone in support to work through an issue. And then they're using that same technology to walk them through it in the exact same way that it would be with a customer.
Right. It's interesting you say that, because back when I started back in the early 90s in the service side of the business, the motto was, you're only a phone call away.
Right. Yeah.
So if you get out there, you get in trouble, you just pick up the phone and call, because you didn't have access to this kind of technology. And it would have changed my life had we had that at that time.
Yeah, one of the funny, I'll never forget, years ago in the 90s, coming back, this is back when I was in field sales, and I was actually in our tech support department asking some questions for a customer, because I happened to be back at our plant. And there was a cartoon on there that said, somebody was trying to, it was an illustration showing a tech support person on one side telling the person on the other side to point and click. So it was trying to show them how to use their computer. And it showed somebody on the other side, they were interpreting that phone call when they said point and click. They were pointing at the screen and clicking at the same time. They weren't pointing and clicking with the mouse. And I would laugh about that, because it's true, right? I mean, it's what you hear is what you think is what is needed, but trying to describe something over the phone, when that you have one dimension to explain something, it can be interpreted in all kinds of ways. So thankfully today, through access remotely and using augmented reality, there's other ways that you can better interpret and see what's happening. And of course, at the end of the day, you're trying to just get to the solution faster, right, and not frustrate somebody.
Yeah. And that's one area I could tell you this is the younger generation has a huge upside over ourselves, or even people at close to the retirement age, is technology and how quick they understand and can take things in. I bought my parents a Echo Show for Christmas, and it was exhausting to watch them try and understand. I mean, they're 80 and they're okay. Call this number 612. Oh no, not 612. You can't say no, and this thing doesn't understand no, or right, or not that, or you have to go back and start over and say it again, and to try and explain that. Whereas a kid, nothing. They pick it up right away. They know what they have to do, and it's just a different generational thing when it comes to technology, because they're growing up with this stuff. When I started computers, I started in high school, which was early at that time, but still, computers have only been around such a short time, especially for access to the average person. And that's really changed how I look at it, but they have never not known this technology. And
yeah, there's no question about that. I mean, it's interesting. I've seen in our press brake training classes, for example, our controls these days are all touch screen, and they got graphics on them, and they look really cool. And depending on your perspective, they're easy to operate. But I've seen literally side by side where you'll have, the old school guy who, grew up, operating a machine manually with no CNC controls, and he has all this knowledge in his head on how he could calculate, tonnage and bend allowance and all these things. It's all that. But you put him on that control and just try to have him pull up a CAD file or do something, and he's intimidated by it, or he's frustrated by it. Or on the flip side, you have, the kid that's grown up in this online world with everything on their smartphone, and they may not know a thing about sheet metal or bend allowance or any of these things, but you ask them to go to the screen and enter stuff in and pull some up, they're all over it. They're tapping away, and they're very comfortable with that. In fact, they like that. That's what they prefer. Mm-hmm. And it's just a mindset, right? It's a generational thing, and it's a challenge, because today we have customers that are on both ends of that spectrum, and so it can be challenging. Technology is great when it works well, or when you understand it, but if you don't, it can be equally as frustrating.
Oh yeah, that's for sure. All right, Matt, we're just about out of time, so do me a favor and tell everybody how they can reach you and get in touch with you.
Yeah, so Cincinnati Incorporated, we are online. We have a website. It's e-ci.com, and I manage that myself. We have just an abundance of information about our products, but also about our success stories with customers and stuff. We're on social media. You can check us out. We're pretty active on there, just sharing what our customers are doing and some of the things we do, plus a lot of history because we're an old company. So go there and look for events that we're at. We're at most of the trade shows these days, and we're welcome to talk to you.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Matt. I want to thank our sponsors, the Precision Metal Forming Association and the PMA's Educational Foundation, for helping us get this show going. And you can listen to our other episodes either at longevityindustries.com or at Apple Podcast, Google Podcast, or whatever favorite source you have. Any suggestions or comments, please send them to me at dean@longevityindustries.com. Go out there and make it a great day.